Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Carl Goulet. I am the gallery director here at 5 Points. Both current exhibitions will be up through October 22nd. 5 Points Gallery is open Tuesday through Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. and open by appointment. Tonight's talk will be recorded and available to watch later this weekend on our website, 5pointsarts.org. Throughout the conversation, I will be screen sharing images of the individual artist's work and installation images. Moderating tonight's talk is our executive director, Judith McElhone. Under Judy's leadership, 5 Points has grown from the small contemporary storefront gallery to the arts organization that it is today, including 3 beautifully renovated exhibition gallery spaces, a community pop-up gallery, also known as the Annex, the 5 Points Launchpad, and the newly renovated 5 Points Arts Center. As an exhibiting artist herself, Judy holds an associate's degree, bachelor's, and MFA. She taught at the University of Hartford and was an adjunct professor of art at Northwestern Connecticut Community College for over 20 years. Joining us on tonight's panel, we welcome all of our exhibiting artists. Victor Legere, who has the solo exhibition in our East Gallery, is a realist painter whose plein air paintings capture the contrast between deep space and the high detail of the environment. His intention is to accurately express the natural beauty of our surroundings. Nature's Triumphs is a group exhibition in our West and TDP galleries that feature a range of styles and mediums and is based on human interactions within the environment and how people ultimately manipulate, interfere with, or alter nature. Featuring artists Leora Armstrong, Erin Burkowski, Lauren Eiferman, Lisa Kellner, and Scott Schultz. Leora is an interdisciplinary artist whose mixed media works depict ice erasure, a consequence of human interactions on the environment. Her multi-paneled installation of cyanotype on silk creates a sensorial experience of place. Erin Burkowski's abstract photography uses digital manipulations to duplicate and alter the viewer's perception of the natural world, creating kaleidoscope-like compositions. Lauren Eiferman's sculptures portray the impacts humans have on the ecosystem. Using found branches and a unique sculptural process, her work also speaks to the primal desire to touch nature. Lisa Kellner explores the reluctant yet habitual collaboration of humans and nature. Her large oil paintings reflect on perceptions of space, not only its physical attributes, but also its memories. Paired with her small sculptures created out of paint and collected detritus. Scott Schultz is a multidisciplinary artist working with the environment and natural sciences. His hand-beaded works in this exhibition explore the idea of mankind's often counterproductive relationship with nature. And let's hand things over to Judy and we can all get started. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who have logged on tonight for this talk between these amazing artists. I want to thank all the artists for exhibiting at 5 Points Gallery. We've gotten a lot of credit for the work we've done in 5 Points Gallery and for downtown Torrington, but it's only because of all of you who brought your talent and shared it with our community. So again, thank you. Nature imagery is very close to my heart. That's a lot of my own work. Until I can volunteer, I haven't had a chance to do too much of my own work. So I was, first of all, I think it's a very important subject to be considered in today's world. And the exhibitions we have in 5 Points Gallery are geared to showing art that is relevant to all our lives, to everyday life. And so I think what I'd like to talk about a lot and have you casually talk among one another is about the processes that you use, because they are so different, and the reasons why you're using those processes or why you're engaged at all in these nature images is, I think, very interesting. So I'm going to kick it off and I'm going to start with Victor. So Victor has shown in 5 Points before, and he is a beloved teacher at Torrington High School. And we're delighted to have him back. And, you know, I've seen a lot of your work through the years, Victor, and you do a lot of plein air painting. And the work you're showing in this particular exhibition seems to me to be a little different. Do you want to talk about that at all? I'm sure Carl will bring up an image.
Sure. I've been trying to find something that would set these different than your average landscape, and talking with people in the field, in the art critic world. I met a John O'Haron back 10 years ago in Santa Fe, and he suggested, you know, obviously landscape painting has been done 10,000 times. And if you're going to try to make it contemporary and make it, you know, stand out, two of the ways you can do that is with atmospheric conditions and or compositional, something different compositionally. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what to do about that. But over the years, I started gravitating towards individual trees and painting like portraits of trees, standing year round, doing some in the wintertime, fall, summer, and they almost became like portraits. And I was drawing and painting these as beings. I see these as very individual beings. I don't know if spirits is not quite the right word, entities for sure. And I want to give them that respect individually. And then I started moving away from painting the horizon line and looking up through trees and through, so that now there's more blue sky and more trees. And that all of a sudden it hit me with an epiphany that this is what John O'Hearn was talking about in terms of composition, that the horizon alone, getting away from showing the horizon, either looking down or looking up, all of a sudden takes it to a different, a little more contemporary feeling and different look. So I've done some paintings looking up through the tree. This is what this whole show is, looking up through the trees. But I've also done a bunch of paintings looking down at the base of trees with no horizon line. And I find these more interesting. Going back, I find, you know, this body of work right here is just the last 4 or 5 years. But I started thinking about, and this is the funny thing, you know, I've been doing it for 30, 40 years now, is that I'm finding that what I'm doing now reminds me of stuff I wanted to do or thought about as a kid, as a young adult, somebody, you know, in my 30s, when I was going to art school. I remember sitting on my front porch as a kid and looking up through the trees, and like, you know, back then we didn't use the word meditation or mindfulness, but I remember distinctly spending hours looking up into the tree, up through the sky, and seeing the holes that the blue sky would make, the groupings of leaves, the interesting branches. I had 2 or 3 of these large trees in my front yard, and I remember just gazing through them for hours, looking up directly into the blue sky as a kid. And I forgot all about that until I started doing these paintings again 30, 40, 50 years later. So it just seems like, you know, the more you do something different, the more it just comes back to who you were or who you are and where we are. I hope that answers your question.
It does. One thing that came to mind, what I was thinking of when I was looking at the work in the gallery, is your framing. I mean, the frame seems to give us a window into the world in a different way than what I've seen you do before. Is that true? Why did you? And for those of you who can't see that clearly, and in this image, the inner part of the frame is painted a slightly different color than the outer part, but also within that, so skyscape feel. So what made you decide, and have you always done frames, or I just like this, or if I just missed it?
No. Being a woodworker at heart, I
Wow.
did that as a different career. I always made my own frames. I never bought frames. And when I first started making landscape painting 20 years ago, I was making this shape, but with a lot of gold trim on it, and redwood and rosewood, and they look extremely traditional, like you might see in a hunting lodge or something. They did not have that black edge going around it, that hollowed out space that's painted flat black. That's a new thing. And painting them all one solid neutral gray is a new thing just in the last 5-10 years. I see the frame, these wide frames, as taking these two-dimensional images and really making them sculptural, three-dimensional. That's one reason I do it, because now it's an object on the wall. Because realistically, painting, we could see, our eyes can see the most subtle highlights of the paint. So even though these are painted fairly flat, there's a lot of very subtle impasto happening on the bark, on the leaves, that when you stand 3, 4, 5 feet away, your eye can see that on a subconscious level. And you know that you're looking at not a flat image, not a photograph, not a piece of paper, but a three-dimensional image that's created out of paint. And it becomes, on a very subtle level, it's a three-dimensional piece of sculpture. And I find that the frame exaggerates that idea, that now you're looking at something that's a window effect. So the four edges with that scalloped out edge appears more like a window trim. So that really, now it really does highlight the effect that what I'm trying to get at is this is a window on your wall, and outside the wall is this image, whatever it is, a landscape. In my case, it's these trees. You're looking out through autumn trees with the blue sky, which is a natural, great combination of colors.
And I can tell you, he's built not only these frames, but he's built the support and the backing of the support. And I can tell you personally, they're very heavy to move.
They used to be heavier. I've learned how to make them lighter.
Can't imagine.
So,
Thanks, Vic. We'll get back with some more questions, I'm sure. I'd like to go to Leora now. Leora is very patiently in Scotland at a later hour of the night. And Leora's images were very striking to me. I've learned a lot about cyanotypes since we've opened the Art Center, and we've had workshops on cyanotypes, but I've never seen them quite like this. Can you talk, and the scale, can you talk a little bit why you choose cyanotype for your work? And have you always, or is this something new for you? And also, basically, how do you do it this large? And on silk, yeah.
Thank you, Judith. It's I discovered cyanotype as the way I wanted to find a medium I could work within the environment, that the environment would have an imprint on the work. So it became something I could use because it's exposed outside. And I also didn't want to have a control over the work. So by using it on silk, I was able to take this work and place it outside for sometimes hours, sometimes, on and off different periods of time, and allow the environment, place to imprint. The concept for this series came from having walked on a glacier and having seen the loss of glacier space. And if anyone has ever had the great privilege of being in such a place, there are these brilliant crevasses that you look down that have these layers and depths of blue, and the ice does have layers and depths of blue. And I wanted to somehow memorialize these glaciers that are being lost. So this is as I describe it, it's a breath of place, something that is made originally from water, and then it is placed, I make it with silk. And so I think of each layer as a year in the life of an event with ice. And so this is 15 panels, so it would be 15 years, but it doesn't exist anymore. It's just a breath of something that's no longer there. But I wanted human people, us to be able to walk through it, interact with it, touch it, feel it, and to somehow see how we touch place, that you don't have to touch something for it to move. And there's that space between what we touch and our impact on things. And when you walk past this piece that moves as you do, you can see that gap of space of touching and not touching, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Perfect.
And so it's and I love this, the fact that you can walk through this work. This is supposed to be touched and held and interacted with, which is also a treat, I think, with work where we're not supposed to touch something. But this is something that in my view, in the external world, in place, you know, it's very hard to access a glacier. It's very hard to touch these places for most people. And so this is bringing it, for me, it's a memory and a memorial to things that may not be there. Hopefully in our lifetimes there will be, but may not be in the future.
Have you worked with Cyanotype for a long time, or did it come to you for this particular project?
For this particular project, it came to me. I mean, I have worked for it in a more traditional sense of doing transparencies, but I really wanted to not have control. I wanted to take my hand away from the process and to really have as little control as possible. So the marks, the imprints, the type of weather, every single one is different because of the light, what was happening externally. So it's really made with a collaboration with place, with the outside.
So they hang outside. I'm sorry.
I make the work outside. The work is all made outside. I've done other series with Cyanotype where I've stood on frozen places and made imprints with my hands and my feet. And then those places have again disappeared. They're no longer there, and I've made books from the imprint of my feet. I've made cloth books from them, and I've used other people to make imprints. So it's a sort of collaboration with people making an imprint of how we touch place. And it is the action that is left behind, the imprint of the hand or the foot that is left from the place itself doesn't exist anymore. It's just that memory of a hand there. So that has been, I've just always been interested in when I have a walking practice. So I'm always interested in when you're walking in a place that it changes every single time you move in it, and that some places are there and then they disappear again. And if we're lucky, they come back. And that is the process of my work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I move on to Erin Burkowski? Now, Erin is using digital media, and in a way, and you starting off with, I'll let you talk more about it, Erin, your presentation and how you're using nature in your work. I have recently been introduced more to digital photography than I thought I would be, and learned a little bit about it through what we're doing again at the Arts Center. But can you talk to what brought you to starting to make this work? And how can you talk about a little bit about the process, but what made you choose nature for this, and a little more about your process?
Okay, so it's kind of a long story, but I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. I was taking care of my parents at the time, and they're no longer with us. But I was starting to just take a lot of photographs with my phone, and I was looking for something to get a design and take the color palette and come up with a design from a picture. And I stumbled on an Instagram app that was, I guess, what I was looking for. And once I found that, and I got reactions from both my wife, who's a wonderful artist, and Dave Holtzman, another great, local artist, who's a good friend. And both of them were instantaneously like, wow, that's very cool. And so it inspired me to just keep going. And when I brought my parents into this because this process is, once you get started with it, you can rapidly get images and get reactions from yourself and decide whether or not you want it. So, and it was something I could take a picture and I could put it away, and because I was on the run a lot, and then I would come back to it and I could spend some time with it, and I could always put it down, and it never needed me to be in a place where I was working for a long period of time. So Carl's going through these, but so the process with I take a picture, like this one that's on the screen now, just came up recently. We were at our grandson's house, and I found a leaf, an oak leaf that had holes in it, and I thought, there's maybe some potential here. And I held it up to the sky, and I was like, oh, the sepia and the blue, that's a cool palette, and let me so I take a picture of the leaf, and then I go and I edit it, and take a chunk of that photo and put it into the application that allows me to mirror it and flip it, and I may take, and when I take that picture and take that edit, I may spin the picture a bit to get some kind of angularity to it or whatever, but I get it in there and see what I can come up with. And if I like the result like this one, then I'm going to choose it. I don't know, Carl, if that's the process. This one is a purple kohlrabi. I actually, so the previous one, the leaf, I set that one up once I was going, but early on in this process, I actually had a picture of a kohlrabi on the kitchen counter, and I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, that would be an interesting subject for this process. So I went back for a photo that I actually already had, and then started manipulating it and came up with this. So that's one of the ones that was an existing photo before I even started doing this, but I went back into my my photo roll and found that. I don't know. That answers your question.
It does. And can you talk a little bit about your presentation? Because several of the images, 3, I believe, are framed, and the others are not framed, but presented in a really different way.
Yeah.
Do you see them differently because of the way you present them? Or it was a random choice?
So that's a great question. So this has been, Dave Holzman has been very helpful to me in the presentation. The one that's on the screen currently now was my original presentation that I had come up with myself, how I wanted to do it. And I started out small. This one happens to be 16 by 16. And I just was starting the process, and I wanted it to be just like I was seeing on my phone. So the image looks just like that on the phone. It goes right off of the canvas, or whatever you want to call it. But the one Carl was showing previously was just, that one there. You just, I started with that. You've got the image, and there's no frame, and it just goes right off into space, and that's how you see it on your phone. So I was going with that, and Dave prompted me to make them bigger. I was starting out small, and so I got to the 16 by 16 size, and you can go bigger than that, but it's a square format. And then at some point he said, maybe you want to frame them. So I started putting them in frames, and in the exhibit, the one in the center, the one of the leaf, it happens to be double matted in a standard kind of presentation format, and it's double matted, and there it is. And I showed that to Dave, and he said, that's pretty nice, but the matting kind of constricts it a bit, and I'm wondering what's beyond the mat, So I said, well, gee. So I thought about it a little bit, and the ones on the right and the left in that photo are deckle edge they're prints on fine art paper. All of the presentations you're seeing, I get from a place called Bay Photo in California, but they have all kinds of presentations. And he said, oh, that sounds like that might be interesting. So I chose some images that I had and went with a deckled edge on paper, and it's a floating mount. And I was really pleased with him. He was, and of course, in all of this, like I said, my wife is reacting to all this too, and she's giving me positive feedback. So I just it's kind of with the framing and all that, it's just kind of the process is kind of a gut process for me. And I go with that with the frame, do I want to put this one in the frame, don't I, or whatever. This one here, the cabbage, it just, there's a lot of this process that it started out with, I was preparing the cabbage to eat, and I was looking at the outside leaves on this one cabbage, and I said to myself, my goodness, that green is incredible. And so I had these leaves, I put them on the floor in I just laid them out on the floor in a pattern, and then I did my process, what I was saying before, took a picture, started editing it, and then worked with it. And this one, I was, at the time, I was very pleased with it, because to me, it had a whole Tesla thing going there with the static electricity, to me, down the middle and all of that, the static electricity, and then along with the leaves on top and the bottom, I can almost see like I'm looking down an endless cavern at the same time. But that's what's great about this process for me is another one of my friends early on Instagram said, hey, Aaron, it's a Rorschach test. And I was like, yeah, so I've been, pleased to interact with people and just say, like with that green one, people have, said, I see this and I see that, and it's not what Aaron sees, and everybody sees something different. So I think, that's been pretty satisfying with it.
And also, Aaron, the cabbage one, they're not framed at all. They're presented in a little different way. So they sort of, how would I put it? They present in a slightly different way. They almost seemed like they're floating in space. And both presentations are interesting, and they were interesting as we installed as well. So I also want to reach over and move on a little bit to Lauren. So Lauren, you're making me think so many different things. I came out of my driveway this morning, and there was a stick in the road. I almost stopped and picked it up and said, oh, okay, she's going to want that. Your process is just so amazing to me. Can you talk a little bit about it for everyone? And then we'll go back, and hopefully everyone can ask one another some more questions about their process. But
sure.
The detail and the time, can you talk about that?
It's crazy time consuming. I've developed this process over the past 35, 40 years of working with wood. And I have can everybody see this? I'm not seeing anything, so I don't know if you can see this piece of wood I have. Mm-hmm. So this is a piece of wood, this is a piece of wood, this is a piece of wood, that and that. And I look for shapes found within sticks. I start off my day each morning and walk in my neighborhood in the woods and collect sticks. And I bring them back to my studio and I leave them there. And yes, my neighbors also leave me sticks. So I love that you're seeing these sticks and these shape and the wondrousness of sticks, because they're nature's detritus they're cast off, and then I've been picking them up, this material that surrounds us that nature sheds, and I've been gathering them and using that wood and turning it into art. And so with each stick, I find the shape, and then I put a putty around each joint, and then I wait for it to dry, sand it, and I reapply the putty at least 3 times, because I want the work to look as if it's grown in nature, when in fact each sculpture is usually made of hundreds of small pieces of wood that have been jointed together like this. So it is a very time-consuming process, but
So
I'm
Lauren,
obsessed.
what brought you to that? What brought you to that? I mean, what gave you that idea?
I used to be a painter, and I was living in Little Italy, downtown Manhattan, and I had 3 painting walls, and it was August, and oil paint does not dry in New York City summers. It just doesn't. And I'm someone who always needs to be making and creating and working with my hands. So I picked up a piece of I couldn't work on my paintings, couldn't put them away because they were wet. And I had a piece of balsa wood on my drafting table and a straight edge razor blade that I was using for framing. And I picked up the balsa wood and started whittling. And literally 8 hours later, this is the days before cell phones and distractions and all that, literally 8 hours passed. And I went, oh, I'm a sculptor, not a painter. That's right. And so then I kept on using balsa wood and realized it was a horrible material. So I started collecting sticks, and then I realized straight edge razor blades are not great tools because my hands were getting so cut up. So I got whittling tools, and then I got some power tools, and now I use a simple Fordham, which a lot of jewelers use. It actually sort of sounds like a dentist tool, but it's a flexible shaft tool that I use. And I've developed this process. My work is not steam bent, and it's, we were talking before about meditative work. Well, I get in the zone of working and I just do it. And some days are better than others, and some days I drill holes and they work, and other days they don't. It's all a process, but this is what I've been doing for many, many, many years. And my subject matter changes a lot. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, but this piece that's up now is part of a series called Nature Will Heal, where I take the detritus from our lives, the plastic pollution, the children's plastic toys. These were solar lights. And my thinking is that Mother Nature has the ability to heal our planet if we heed and listen. And with this, I've taken the detritus and built these strange new plant forms that are transforming the pollution, the detritus, and transforming it into a new plant, a new growth. So nature will heal.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. And
You're
I think we all know that life is a journey, and certainly making art is a journey as we
Yes.
go along that journey's edge. So and the next person I want to go to is Lisa. And Lisa, your paintings and your sculptures and the fact how you put them together were absolutely amazing. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you've talked about the fact that some of where you live, some of the rubbish piles up into the natural world. And it's fascinating to me how in some ways it's purely abstract, in other ways, not at all. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about how you got there. Okay.
Yeah, well, I am primarily an abstract painter, and I'm pretty minimalist. Hopefully you can hear me. But I live on an island, a bridged island off the coast of Maine, and it's a working lobsterman island, and very remotely. And I am completely immersed in the nature where I am. And I guess, you know, during the pandemic, nature was a real held sustenance for me more than ever. And, you know, part of my daily routine is going down to the coast and to the shore and picking up all the things that wash up. And it's incredible what washes up. And, you know, we bring it to the dump. And I got to the point where I was just, you know, frustrated with that and wanted to incorporate all these things I was collecting into my work. So that's where these paintings and the wall sculptures came from. You know, what's so interesting, and I relate a lot to what Lauren just said, because on the coast, so in this particular painting, that pink thing is foam, is a styrofoam that has been embedded in the root of a tree. So what I was trying to do with these paintings is experience landscape up close as you can be. So this imagery is coming initially from a rotted hole in an old tree where some detritus has been embedded. So making paintings that sort of abstract the landscape and also incorporate these things that are washing ashore. And like Lauren said, you know, nature is incredible because some of this foam, you know, the styrofoam does not deteriorate, but the nature, you know, nature will kind of grow moss on it, and it gets embedded into the landscape and becomes part. Sometimes, you know, this has a rope. The blue is a boating rope that's been embedded into the grass and seaweed, drenched in the soil and the plants, that it's there. So I just found that really interesting and wanted to kind of explore the patterns and systems in nature and you know, work my way out of that, create that on the canvas, and then just kind of go with it myself and not reference anything. So it starts with a lot of exploration and photographing and then bringing things back to the studio. So with these wall sculptures, they're the embedded space series. And what I did with them is collected small bits of garbage that had washed up. I mean, we'll get fishermen's overalls washing up, socks, you know, of course, glass and normal things, driftwood, but styrofoam. It's really incredible what comes ashore. So I wanted to make wall sculptures that merged construction materials with these washed up objects. So these wall sculptures have insulation materials, resin, glue, wood, and then all these little bits and pieces, screws and nuts and bits of fabric and bits of water bottles that have washed ashore are embedded in them. Yeah. So let me see if
Thank
there's
you.
anything else.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to move on, and then hopefully we can all go back and ask questions of one another. And I have a couple that come to mind also, but let's visit with Scott. And Scott, I was just intrigued when I read your statement and that you've tried so many different media and learned through each one and discovered, even if you start intuitively. And certainly this multidisciplinary approach that you have is one that I think is certainly one that a lot of artists are using today. And all of you are doing so many different interesting things with either the media we're used to or new media. So Scott, would you talk a little bit about this hand sewn beadwork and what got you there? And how long does it take to do it?
I am a self-taught. Yeah. I am a self-taught artist, and beadwork is my original media. And I was teaching myself about Native American artwork, and I found that I didn't understand the art historian descriptions unless I had my hands involved. And so I started out, let's see, almost 30 years ago, doing little dinky, thumb-sized beadwork things, and they just kept getting bigger and bigger. And eventually I made something that was original, and then it kept getting bigger and bigger. And now you see where I've ended up.
And Scott, you sew all these by hand?
It's all hand sewn, yeah. It's glass beads. It's sewn by hand. This piece here was Notes from Smoke Farm. Took about 5 months, but that was kind of like sewing at 8 hours a day, because I had a museum date for that, so I had pitched it as a proposal and then had to kind of do it. But the beads are big, so it's relatively big anyway.
Relatively.
Yeah.
What your selection of your format, what you're using to sew the beads onto? They look like tarps.
Well, yeah, Notes from Smoke Farm was a found piece of canvas. I canoe a lot. I got out of my canoe one day and I found a big tarp and hung on to it because I knew it was going to end up being part of an artwork.
Uh-huh.
And it ended up being, it was perfect for the piece. Otherwise, most of the other stuff is, I work on canvas a lot. And I just go to the fabric store and buy canvas. This piece here, now this is a trade route. This piece took 2 years to make. So, yeah, that's 55 wide, 38 high. And it has a lot, all the text is in beadwork as well. So the text is in number 20 beads. I have special needles that are kind of hard to find to get through those. Those beads are really small. In fact, the needles break after about a half hour. The eye will blow out of them. But ask me a question.
Okay, so why beads?
It turned out that when I was messing around with beadwork, it turned out that I like sewing by hand, and I can sit and sew by hand forever. And I've taught, like, every once in a while I teach a class, and especially when I'm teaching kids, what you'll notice is that there'll be some boys who have never done any sewing before at all, and they will sit there and completely zone out. And all the peer pressure, all that junk they live with, and that goes for me too. All the junk I lived with, it goes away when you're sitting there sewing by hand. So it becomes very meditative.
Scott, do you make drawings ahead of time? Do you make drawings ahead of time? Or draw
Well,
any of the process at all?
Yeah, well, like this one is based on a photograph.
Okay.
And you can see that it's a photograph that my bowman took. This is on the Yakima River in eastern Washington. He took a photo. He turned around and took a photograph of me. It's really just. I'm very much functioning like an explorer when I'm outside, and so I do a lot of exploration, kind of wandering around, picking stuff up, trying to figure out why things look the way they do, why the land looks the way it does. And I liked this photo in particular, first off, he caught me looking ahead, looking way out ahead of the canoe. And that's kind of, yeah, there's a reason for that. But what I did, you can see that the water hasn't been beaded like water. It's been beaded as a bunch of different reports and scientific data and maps and pieces of policy, because the idea here is that anywhere I end up paddling, because I canoe a lot now, but anywhere I go, it looks the way it does because of policies and laws. It's either been protected by policy or abused by policy, but nothing looks the way it does, without this kind of interference, often from people that never have been in that place, Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So I am just going to stop a second and ask you, each of you, to ask if you have any questions to ask one another before I barge in with others.
I have a quick question for, I believe, Lauren Eiferman.
Mhm. Yeah.
As a woodworker, I'm fascinated. How are you joining those pieces together so that they stay?
Good question. Dowels and Type Bond 3, my favorite glue. And then I make a putty out of Type Bond 3 and sawdust, and that seals everything together. So they hold. I have some pieces that are 35 years old and there are no cracks in them. They're stable. So
Nice.
yeah. Type Bond 3 is my friend.
Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to ask Victor. Do you always use oil paint and not acrylics, and why?
Oh, that's an easy one. Oil paint is 1,000 times more forgiving than acrylic paint. People who paint with acrylic, it's fine, of course. I'm not going to make any judgment call about it, but they like the idea that you can work fast and you can paint on top of it. I don't have any problem working with something that takes hours to dry. I just work with that. I make it work for me. I put on these paintings in layers. I do the background first, and I work my way forward as the paint dries. I don't work with any other medium just because I have a full-time day job. I'm a teacher, as you know, and I, of course, could dabble in watercolor. I could paint in acrylic. I have plenty of experience painting in watercolor and acrylic and drawing. I have figured out a way to make the hours I do paint work with just oil paints. And I think they're pretty darn nice the way they are. And to try a completely another medium and master it would just seem at this point like a lot of time that I don't have time for while I'm teaching during the day.
Well, I can tell you that in my family, some people at the dining room table don't want to discuss religion or politics. At our dining room table, it's often acrylic versus oils. That's what you have for having kids that are also in the arts.
Right.
So, and I totally agree with you on oils. Thank you. More questions for one another?
Leora, I have a
Yes.
question for Leora. Hi.
Hi.
Are you still working in cyanotype or are you doing something else now?
I have been working in Cyanotype. This current series that you see is very recent. It was made this year. And I'm interested in working it, taking it, how far can I take this medium is I have some ideas. I have a lot of remnants of silk that I want to make drawings with. So I will start embedding these pieces in a different way as a form of drawing. But I work in many, many mediums. I burn paper, I work with paint, graphite, silver leaf. I love various processes. So I'm a process-oriented person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've got to say, when I visited the gallery, it was a pretty windy day. And every time the door opened, your work would like move. It was great. It's really
thank
cool.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I love that. I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I've got to say, I really love all your work, everyone's work in this show. I'm really thrilled. I didn't know a lot of your work before, all these artists, and I'm thrilled to be part of it. So
That's one of
thank
the
you
things,
all.
that's one of the things we aim for, is to bring artists making excellent work together, so that after this, we hope you'll reach out and network with one another, share ideas. And that's part of what we try to do as well. I have to ask Leora, is it different making art here in Connecticut as opposed to making art in Scotland? Do you feel differently about it?
I do my work often when I'm traveling. I tend to walk a lot and I just gather. I make small drawings in a notebook, and then I will bring them back to a larger place to make the work. It's really about me being in place and touching places and being with, gathering the energy of a place. And I grew up here, and I think it's almost like a muse to me coming back to Scotland or going to the islands in remote places. It's just where I reboot myself. And I think it's anywhere near water is helpful for me. Any of the islands I love. But yes, my work changes. My work is different. Here I collect, I do a lot of stone collecting, and I work a lot on slate with silver leaf when I'm in Scotland, often cataloguing walks that I've done, and they've become like single line drawings. But with silver leaf, they tarnish over time, which is also something I love, is something that's beyond my control. I can't control it. That the drawing will continue to shift as time does.
Thank you. Any more questions for one another?
I have one, Judy.
Okay, good.
It's just that I did want to say the same thing as Lauren said. As far as being all these artists, I'm just amazed to be still pinching myself that I'm part of this. But and everything that somebody's talked about, I can totally relate to with what I've experienced in just in life and doing various things. And Scott, like, I get the meditative part because my mom taught me how to sew, so I could do that. But so that's what makes me respect this so much, because I would just would go crazy. I couldn't do that. So it's fantastic what he's doing and what everybody's doing. But so I had a Lauren Eiferman, a short essay question, because my wife Kathleen is fascinated with the Voynich manuscripts also, and that's what she's doing with some of the work that, like that one right there, that's in the show. So if you just explain to us a little bit about that manuscript.
Yeah, the manuscript, I found it online one night. It's a early, they believe, 15th century manuscript written in an unknown language by an unknown author and filled with, it's divided into 6 chapters, I guess, or sections. And the first section is an herbal section, and it's filled with plants that don't exist in nature. They're totally wondrous. The roots and rhizomes are out of proportions, the leaves, it's just an incredible incredible manuscript. It's currently housed at Yale's Beinecke Library, the original one. It was discovered by this man named Voynich, who was from Czechoslovakia. And he was the first person to sell it. So it's an incredible manuscript. And for the past 5 years, I've been translating a lot of the botanicals into 3D sculptures. So that's one, and there are a number of them in the show. So I am working on a new one now, even as we speak. So yeah.
Lisa, do you find living on an island or in a remote area like it is gives you more time to concentrate on your work? Does it inspire you more, or when you travel, do you get more ideas?
Well, I lived in New York for a number of years and was just ready to try living remotely. And there was a learning curve for a couple years, but now we're chopping wood and okay when the power goes out, and it really embracing it. It does seep into my work. It kind of overtakes you and demands you pay attention. So I was just traveling and was surprised at how noisy the world is, based on where I live. It's very, very quiet. There's no highways or traffic or big screens. And so I guess I've acclimated pretty well, but you live by the sunrises and the fishermen and the 60-mile-an-hour winds. Nature demands and that you pay attention, and you have to respect it here. So that's what we do.
Yeah, that's lovely. I know one of my favorite places on earth is Block Island, and whenever I'm there off season, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
How about someone else? Another
What
question.
island is that you live on, Lisa?
It's Deer Isle.
Oh,
Deer
yeah.
Isle. In,
Oh,
yeah.
Beautiful there.
Yeah. Very special.
How many people use photography in their work other than the obvious ones that have mentioned it? Does anyone else use photography in their work? Certainly Aaron does. And yeah, Scott.
I do as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a way sometimes of bringing something from a place to a more intimate place, so you can hold it and keep reminding yourself of something. And even if you re-photograph things, they change all the time. They're like notebooks, really.
Yes.
I use my camera as a journal almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and don't you think photography has changed so much in the last, say, even 10 years, never mind 20 years, that so many people are using that in so many different ways, even cyanotypes. It's a type of alternative photography. So much.
I'm really glad I don't have to pay for film developing. Because I shoot a lot. I remember going on trips where I had 10 rolls of film that had to last a month. That's not, and that was a lot of film. That's not an issue.
No, it's not. No. And also, Victor, do you ever use photography? I know you do a lot of plein air painting. Do you ever use photography?
Yeah, pretty much all these paintings are done from a small study. And while I'm doing the painting, the plein air painting, I'm taking dozens and dozens of pictures.
Interesting. And
I use a digital camera, and I set the custom on it so that I can get three shots done at 3 different lighting sessions, so that I can get a darker, a mid-tone, and a lighter version. And then I'll use that somewhat. I use the photography more for the larger painting in the studio to get the edges and the drawing and the leaf shapes down. And I use a plein air painting for the color work. So I can,
Excellent.
the colors are more accurate in the painting than they are from the photography.
Well, I think Carl's going to cut us off pretty soon. But does
Oh, no.
anyone, does anyone have anything else they would like to add before we close?
I want to say real quick, it's been a pleasure talking with everybody here. You all do amazing work. It was
Yeah.
so interesting listening to your processes.
Thank you, Rita.
Agreed.
Thank
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed. And
Thank
thank
you.
you, Judith, for
Thank
having
you.
us all.
I can't thank you all enough.
Yes,
Again, the
thank
bar is
you.
raised at 5 points. And I invite each and every one of you, if you would like to teach a course at the new 5 Points Arts Center, you just reach out. We would love
Okay.
that. All right.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
all.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
This
everyone.
was great.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good night now.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you
night,
very much.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Be well.
Night.
Be in touch.
Yeah.